CiNEOLA Presents is a podcast from CiNEOLA, a platform for Latin American stories connecting audiences with diverse representations of Latino America on film. Each episode will feature conversations between filmmakers, artists, and writers from Latin American community. My name is Cohen Ibañez. I'm a Colombian-American filmmaker based here in Oakland. Today I'll be speaking with Daniel Díaz about his film JUNIOR Tu Papá. Daniel is a Colombian-British filmmaker based in San Francisco since 2019. His short films JUNIOR Tu Papá, that premiered in 2024, and Elefant, which premiered in 2022, have screened at True Falls Film Fest, Cartagena International Film Festival, Philadelphia Latino Film Festival, as well as London's Tate Modern and Barbican Center. He has managed marketing and distribution campaigns for Spring Breakers, 12 Years a Slave, Man of Steel, and The Lobster. Daniel is also the founder, co-director of CiNEOLA, director of marketing and audience strategy at Bayback Media, and a founding member of the Bay Area Media Maker Summit. So about JUNIOR Tu Papá. In this ode to football and Colombia's Caribbean region, Daniel, a Colombian-British filmmaker, recalls his first memory of the sport he loves, the 1993 championship final between Junior de Barranquilla and América de Cali, and he watched on a VHS tape with his father in London. His film JUNIOR Tu Papá had its world premiere at True Falls Film Festival and its Latin American premiere at the Cartagena International Film Festival in Colombia. It continued its festival run in screens from Bogotá and Barranquilla to New York, San Francisco, and Edinburgh. Well, it's such a wonderful recognition of your film. And it's so well deserved. It's a great, I've watched it a few times now, and having my family from Barranquilla, it's just you really just captured like an essence of Barranquilla and identity, I appreciate this film so much, and I wanted to ask you kind of, how did it come that you decided to make this short?
Yeah, thank you for the kind words. That's very generous. I'm super happy to be having this conversation with you, particularly with our shared connection. Obviously, making documentaries in the Bay Area, a filmmaker that I really admire, and having the Barranquilla connection, because I feel like when it comes to the Colombian diaspora, you don't meet that many costeños, even in London, as much as places that I've lived at least. So that's very cool. I think in terms of this project, my previous film Elefant, which was my first short as a director, was about the Latino community in London, in Elephant and Castle. There was a strong kind of football element in that. There was a specific kind of scene just showing community spaces and gathering around football. And I've really wanted to make a football film. I think that it's something that's, maybe from a sports documentary perspective, can sometimes feel a little heavy-handed and stereotypical. I kind of really wanted to focus on almost a softer kind of take on the sport in terms of how important it's been for me as a way to remain connected to my Colombian identity, So I was born in West London. I grew up in Southwest London, and my parents are from Colombia. They arrived in England in 1986, and football, I think it's a very kind of common circumstance. Has been a real, I don't know, almost beacon for that connection to home. So Junior de Barranquilla, the team that my dad and that side of the family support, on the Caribbean coast, the north of Colombia, has always been kind of what I look to in terms of, for one, my relationship with my dad, and secondly, just as a way to, to always kind of look back home, and also obviously the Colombian national team as well, and kind of landing on a story that, allowed me to explore that. Felt somewhat kind of selfish, to be honest. I think after making Elefant, which is very much kind of focused on the community, I kind of wanted to challenge myself a bit and kind of be okay, what is just the one film that I want to exist for an audience of just me and no one else. And we had this VHS. I remember really cherishing it. I'd rewatch it a lot, and you know, by coincidence, it ended up being just like one of the most historic games in like Colombian like domestic football like history, because of certain, you know, dramatic sporting events that happened, but also like the kind of context surrounding it. And so that VHS was gone, and so I kind of wanted to almost like recreate it and kind of mine, you know, my memories, my dad's and my uncle's, to almost piece it back together. And so yeah, that's kind of how it started.
Well, it's such a wonderful into exploring all these layers. It's like this touch point that I think is really accessible. But as you were saying, it's not your typical sports doc. Like there, and even in the editing, you have layer upon layer, and including as well landscapes. So I just wanted to hear a little bit about how you envisioned that, in terms of the relationship between these landscapes, football, and this connection between primarily the men in your family, right? Your uncle and your father. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I think that, you know, this is a film that I wanted to really focus on the Caribbean region of Colombia. I wanted the film like to be really just specific. I think that there's just like a real, yeah, like specificity that I wanted to convey. Firstly, with just like the time span, it's like this is a 90-minute period of time that elapsed, the time of the, you know, the duration of the match. And then it's kind of almost like putting that on its side, like what are all the layers that exist, and kind of just taking like a cross section of everything that surrounds that 90 minutes, like the context around it, my relationship with my father, my relationship with Colombia, my father's relationship with Colombia, with his brothers, their relationship with the coast, and then the socio-political context of Colombia at that moment in time, and, you know, making it very focused on the Caribbean Colombian region. So an area that, you know, I have a connection to through my family, but somewhere I've never really lived. My relationship with my father has been, you know, somewhat fraught over the years. And so, you know, my mother's from Bogota, so I have like much more proximity to my family in Bogota through just traveling there more often. And so there's also kind of like a bit of a need to represent La Costa Caribe in a way that I couldn't, because I'm not, you know, my voice isn't the voice for that. And when it comes to everyone kind of lending their memories, it felt like the only way to represent the memory of the coast was, you know, kind of through the landscapes and thinking about the memory that the land holds. And so thinking about the territories, thinking about, you know, the various ecosystems and geographies that exist in the Caribbean region, which are vast, and also kind of paying homage to the land, to be honest with you. And so that was the thinking behind that representation. And you know, El Junior as a team, as you well know, is like really like an emblem, like an icon of the region. You know, a somewhat I don't know, like maybe like forgotten region in certain ways, when it comes to a country that's so kind of like centrally like governed. And so I kind of wanted to pay it its dues, its respect, and show the beauty that it holds. And because Junior's team at that point was also made up of a lot of costeños, so a lot of like local players. And, you know, there's a belief amongst Junior fans that Junior is at its best when the team is full of costeños that are Junior fans. And so the idea initially was like, okay, the main Junior players that were in that starting lineup, looking to where they're from and representing like that landscape. So we were looking at, you know, Carlos Valderrama from Santa Marta, Jose Maria Pasos from Valledupar, Victor Danilo Pacheco from Swan, Ivan René Valenciano, maybe Osvaldo Mackenzie from Barranquilla. And we were looking at those different kind of regions. We only got as far as like Valledupar and Santa Marta, and then we kind of had as much as we needed. I wasn't overly keen on spending much more money. And so at that point, you know, we worked with a cinematographer, Daniel Eduardo Zuleta Suarez, based in Valledupar, who went out and just got this, you know, like beautiful kind of like landscape, and it was like, you know, we want to have that representation, that voice in the film. Like, who best to capture it? Like the land and the team over there. So that's how that came about, and that was one of the earliest things that we captured, as, you know, these kind of, as you mentioned, there's kind of layers and building blocks to the film in the visuals and in the audio, and that kind of felt like the foundation upon which everything should kind of be built upon.
You know, and because it's interesting, you're like, I didn't feel like I was the voice for the region, but I really, while watching it, for me, it feels like a diasporic film. And there's a sense of nostalgia, which is really, I think, related to this idea of displacement, right? In a way, you know, and that immigrant experience. My parents migrated from Colombia to the U.S., and I was born in the U.S. And so I think there's that longing you can feel in the film, because you're trying to retrace the memories and the love of the football and connect. And then I thought it was so fascinating how then you all in your conversation go into how football controls the masses. And so it's like at one time, at this once, you know, having that love, that shared love, and then also like analyzing it, taking a step back. So I just found that really fascinating, and the role of nostalgia. I mean, using these old VHS tapes, and really the film. It's all about, like, for me, there's so much as the texture of that video, and that kind of nostalgia, and then the landscapes are not peopled, you know. So there is sort of these like beautiful natural landscapes, and that's so amazing. The places that you mentioned, I feel like, are so iconic of the coast. So anyway, I'd love to hear, I don't know, was that part of your thinking around ideas of nostalgia? Yeah, I'd love to hear more on.
Yeah, I think nostalgia is a big part of it. I think that, you know, I think as part of the diaspora, I think something for me that there's always like a subtext to being diasporic, which is this kind of melancholy and like longing. And I think that's something that I really wanted to kind of transmit through the film. And again, thinking about making sports films and football films that tapped more into that. They had like kind of like a softness, like a tenderness, especially, you know, you mentioned like kind of the male relationships that the film kind of looks at and treats. Finding kind of like the softness and like the vulnerability in those, especially through something that can be so like hyper masculinized, or however you want to put it, like sport and like football, where at the end of the day it can sometimes just be the most accessible tool for like emotional connection, as opposed to, you know, being something meaningless and kind of, you know, I think people can be quite dismissive of its role when it comes to like connecting like men. But I think a lot of the time it's an indication of some of the loneliness and struggles that exist when it comes to connecting, and that is, you know, almost a substitute for maybe like a lack of emotionality or fluency in that kind of like communication. And at the point of making this film, you know, I hadn't seen my father for about 5 years. We hadn't spoken for about 3.5 years. We've had various periods in our life where that has taken place for whatever reason. But that's also not something I kind of wanted to dwell on. Like, I wanted to kind of, you know, kind of focus on these kind of like beautiful moments that, I don't know, that for me at least personally, just like meant so much. And then with the other perspectives, so like my two uncles, one of them still in Barranquilla, the other left but later on. My father would have been one of the first ones to leave when he went to England, and then another one left later on, Alberto, who's in the film, and he's in New Jersey. So we kind of had like the four perspectives. So it was like me as like fully like diasporic, born outside, raised outside the country. My father, who left in the 80s. My other uncle, who left maybe late 90s, early 2000s roughly. And then the one that like really stayed. And we all have very different relationships and perspectives and memories. And one of the things that I really wanted to do was kind of treat memory with like a different kind of, or to me at least, like a bit of respect of like, I don't care about correctness or like fact when it comes to our recollections. I just wanted like feeling and like, no, like you remember that wrong, or like that's not what happened, or you told me, do you know what I mean? Like someone's memory to them is the most correct account of that moment. And so I wanted to piece together our fragments and create almost this like, I don't even know, like mosaic that it didn't matter how much of it was right and how much of it was like wrong, but that was just kind of like what the truth was that remains, based on, you know, this kind of archive that we were creating of that moment.
Yeah, what I really appreciate about the film is you're not hitting us over the head with these themes, but I feel it right away just when you're on the phone in that building and alone, and you're like trying to connect to your father, I think, in that moment. And it just powerfully, it's, you know, I felt it immediately. Like there's this distance that Daniel is kind of struggling with, and they're finding this like point of connection. And there's this beauty in the sport and just love of, you know, when they get the goal, that's just like this beautiful goal, you know. And I mean, these are incredible, like athletes are. I mean, I love watching sport, you know. It's just incredible talent that and you get to enjoy as a collective and feel emotionally attached in your identity. So it really comes through. So I congratulate you on that. It's not an easy feat. I mean, the way that you were able to bring in these different fragments, but in ways that felt really meaningful. This game, as you know, see in the film, is at a moment of, unfortunately, you know, Colombia has this, you know, constant return to violence, which is part of the reasons many of us are in the diaspora. And I thought the treatment of that, of sort of like it's all within the ether of this place and this memory. And I just found it just so beautifully and elegantly kind of cohere, and like it's like a perfect short film. So I'm curious how audiences, so like True False is, you know, a particular audience, and that's based in the US. And then in Cartagena, you know, costeño identity is something, the regionalism of Colombia is something so profound that a lot of people don't necessarily know outside of Colombia. So yeah, I was just curious like how the conversations went depending on the different audiences that you were reaching.
Yeah, I mean, I was really, I really wanted to get into Cartagena.
Yeah, it's a great film festival.
I really wanted to get into Cartagena, you know, which I think might be a bit, I don't know, almost like, I don't know, even like almost like vulgar to say, like in terms of like, I really had this one festival that I wanted to kind of get into.
Yeah, but that's like,
focus.
I mean, that's the biggest, that's like the Sundance of Latin America, in my opinion, right?
Right,
You know,
it's the oldest film festival in Latin America. It's the city where my dad grew up as well, so there was like a poignancy there, and it was, you know, a film that, from my perspective at least, like was very much rooted in the costeño culture, and showing the film there was like magic. To be honest, it was so lovely. Like my family came over from Barranquilla. We had 2 screenings there, and it was, you know, one of my uncles came. I hadn't probably seen him for about 16 years. A couple of others I hadn't seen for like 5-6 plus years. Sharing the film with them was awesome. And then the second screening that we had as well, we were in a shorts block with other kind of like Cartagena costeño kind of like projects, which for me was like a real honor to kind of be recognized in that space, because I feel like when you're in the diaspora, you're almost kind of like reaching back a little bit and kind of like, you know, like kind of looking to be recognized a little bit. And for me, this film was really, as many of the other layers that we've spoken about, but additionally, like I wanted to kind of almost use it as a bit of like a letter to my family of like, this is what it's like growing up in the diaspora, you know. Like I think we go back and I've had comments from family being like surprised in the past about, oh, like you think of yourself as Colombian, or like, oh, like tienes la pulsera, like, oh, you're like, oh, even though like I think they think that you're in the UK, like why would you think about like you're from London, like that's and so this was kind of like, oh, like this is actually what it's like this is how much I, at least, or we look back to home. This is what it means to us. This is how we connect. And so I kind of wanted to give them a bit of an insight into like a letter for that. And so it honestly sparked a lot of conversations within my family, even on my mother's side, actually. Conversations about our experience as like a migrant family in the UK, and I think even some of the more powerful conversations that were being had were on my mum's side, because it is as much my mum's story as it is my dad's. They moved over to the UK together. They separated when I was younger, but they moved at the same time. She features in it. She's the reason why we were able to get into the UK, because her dad, who passed away when she was a child, but he was British, and lived in South America. And so when my parents were trying to, see their options, my dad was the one that kind of said to her and her sister, like, maybe you're eligible for British citizenship, and maybe we can go to the UK. But they had no contact with that side of the family. They had never been to England. They didn't speak English, but that ended up becoming a pathway for them, and that's how everyone, my mum, her sister, and my uncle and my dad and my older sister, who was born in Bogota, ended up in England. And so there's a lot of conversations that happened there about my cousins, my aunt and uncle, us sharing things that maybe otherwise wouldn't have been shared. And conversations in Cartagena after the screenings, and I got to meet part of the team that had worked on the film for the first time, that came as well, and we all just had like a really great time together, and it was just it was really moving. It was really special for me. That was awesome. And then True False was interesting. It was such a like privilege to be in that festival, in that space, among some of these like unbelievable films, connecting with other filmmakers. And to be honest, there was always an element of me that was a bit tongue-in-cheek of like, it's just funny to think that we'd have like in this almost like intellectual, arty, prestigious space, like someone on stage saying the words "JUNIOR TU PAPÁ," like which is just like a boisterous like chant or nickname for like the film. And so that just kind of gave me satisfaction. That just kind of was amusing to me.
That's great. And that's such a particular festival too. It's a great festival. That's. How about your dad? I want to hear like, how did you guys have a conversation together, like just the two of you after the film? We've had a few conversations, but interestingly, he's the only one that hasn't seen it with an audience on a big screen, because it's never screened in London. So we screened at the New York Colombian Film Festival. Very cool.
Which is awesome. That was the only New York festival that I applied to, that we submitted to. So I was like, this has to be the platform. And so my uncle in New Jersey went over to that, and I've got other family from the other side of the family in New York as well. And in Cartagena, Eduardo, who's in the film, came over from Barranquilla for that. But then Carlos he's in Essex now, just east of London, but he hasn't been able to see it in person, so we've never sat and watched it together. But I think it was surprising for all of them, to be honest, because we were just having these conversations. I was trying to be very open with them in terms of what we were trying to like achieve, but kind of seeing the pieces kind of come together, for the final sequence in the film where we kind of rewatch the game together. That was an interesting one for me in terms of, again, like the perspective on like memory, because I was like, this is my one memory, like this I loved. And then he's like, oh, I didn't really remember this. And I was like, oh shit, that was like a bit of like a gut punch. I was like, shit, like this was wow. And so I think it like opened a few different doors in terms of us like reconnecting in like a different way. And like football is and will always remain kind of like a big like just common ground, like touch point for us when it comes to our relationship and being connected. And I think he was messaging me a lot when I was in Cartagena, like, how's it going, like blah blah blah, like talking a lot, asking how people took it and all of this. And I think that I think he was sad to not been able to have been there, but I think he's been like really enthusiastic. I think he enjoyed the process.
That's so amazing. That's really that's a beautiful to see the film actually having effect in a relationship long term. So can you talk a little bit about what you're working on now and how that is maybe potentially an outgrowth of JUNIOR TU PAPÁ?
So again, kind of continuing with like the football theme, I think I've been kind of looking for a new project we finished this like a year and a half ago, and I think that it kind of opened up a lot for me in terms of, you know, firstly just like coming to San Francisco. I've been here for like 6 years, and I think there's, you know, this project, even finishing Elephant and like the new project, I think moving here has just opened up a lot for me, like creatively, and the way that I kind of like see film, the way that I think I like even just like participate in community and move around spaces with other artists and kind of collaborate. Met like such great collaborators here. You know, my editor and like composer on this project, co-producer Daniel Freeman. Really fantastic. You know, when we talk about the layers, the texture, the editing in this film, and like the pacing of it, like Daniel did such a fantastic job, and, you know, was always kind of someone that I wanted to work on this. I think when we're talking about this memory, kind of like dream-like kind of sensation that I wanted to have in the project, Daniel was, you know, his work is fantastic and has this kind of like, almost feels like this lightness, and kind of like you're floating through his like films with like the music and the editing kind of like combination that he does. Also Camilo Garzón, who's a co-writer and co-producer and worked on the sound in this as well, in terms of, you know, the framing of the Colombian kind of like historical context, and making sure that we were treating that with kind of the respect that we wanted to treat it with, and not leaning too much into like the violence and the kind of like exploitative like use of, you know, those more like salacious like moments, I guess. So yeah, I see my next project as kind of being my like love letter to San Francisco, to be honest. It's a city that's given me so much. My wife's from here, like the friends and community that I found here are like so special. And so yeah, after like a year and a half of kind of looking, you know, there's a community-owned football club here called San Francisco City FC. So I was commissioned by a magazine in London called Mundial, that writes, you know, they write about like football, kind of like culture, lifestyle, fashion, everything kind of around the game, which is kind of what I'm interested in. Less what happens on the pitch, but more like the emotion, the relationships, the spirit, the community around it. And it's a club that's very much kind of born out of that, owned by the supporters, a real embodiment of San Francisco, such a like beautiful, like rich, raw, like community around it of like supporters and fans. Really what I believe like football should be about and is about in other parts of the world, where sports is less, you know, or in the past has been like less commodified, less about franchises and more about like grassroots, and yeah, essentially about the challenges that club's kind of going through. So we've been following the club for 3 months now probably, and we'll be filming throughout the following year. And yeah, I don't know how much to say about it, but yeah, really, really excited about that process. And I think like with all my projects, just like a sense of like needing to get it made, like loving the process so much of just like meeting the people and getting to know the space and participating in it as much as being like a teller of the story. You know, I'm a fan of the club, I'm a member, went to all the home games this season, and I feel like it's a community that yeah, like has a lot of stories to tell, and really holds a lot of the magic of San Francisco, but kind of through that again, just kind of like softer, kind of tender, like footballing kind of lens.
This is so exciting. I can't wait to see how that film progresses, and like, please, you know, anytime you'd want another set of eyes on it, it's very exciting.
Thank you.
And yeah, this was such a pleasure. I always like being in conversation with you.
Likewise.
And colleagues, and to have two Barranquilla linked filmmakers in the same community, it's just kind of awesome, because it's, yeah, we know kind of that particular aspect of our identities.
Right,
so.
for sure. No, it's really special. Thank you so much, Emily.
Thank you.
Cheers.